You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cricket Podcast, where we're going to be talking about something serious. We're talking about England's decision to pull out of their tour of Pakistan. That obviously follows the news that New Zealand had done the same thing at the very last minute in the case of the Kiwis. It means that the scheduled T20s between the England's men's and the England's women's teams and their Pakistani counterparts for mid-October will now no longer take place. I am Jack Hope, and I am joined for this topic or for this show by Max Brown. How are you doing, Max?
Hello. Yeah, all good. Thank you, Jack.
It should be. So we've just come off the back of doing our IPL Daily Show, which I think we'll tack on to the end of this episode for our audio listeners. If you don't know the result, it was an absolute debacle. Sunrisers Hyderabad were terrible. We tried to make it entertaining, which mainly consisted of us shouting about Sunrisers Hyderabad. You can listen to it then. If you're on YouTube, go and watch that video, or don't. It's up to you. Just a few messages as well. We're sponsored by Woodstock Cricket, TCP25 over at their website for 25% off their gear. Patreon.com/The Cricket Pod if you'd like to support us directly and get some exclusive stuff. And we're on Twitter and Instagram at The Cricket Pod. Max, I'm going to give you quite a difficult task here with the Max summary. Can you explain what's happened and why we're talking about it?
Okay. So a few days ago, New Zealand were due to be going to Pakistan to play some cricket.
They were there.
They were there. And on the eve of the game, I believe it was, the New Zealand team pulled out, citing security concerns. And what they said was a specified security threat. The Pakistani Cricket Board, I think, tried to assure them that their security was foolproof. And I think there was a 4,000 person security detail involved to try and keep things safe. But nevertheless, a New Zealand team took the decision to pull out, which obviously led people to ask what England were going to do. They said they would make a decision in the next couple of days. And unsurprisingly to anyone, I think, England followed suit by then pulling out, although their reasons were much less specific from what I can tell from their statement. And they didn't highlight a specific security threat as such as saying general concerns about traveling to the region. And I do believe that the security company that New Zealand use, or the security consultants that New Zealand use, are the same that England also use. So again, adding to the lack of surprise at England's decision, whether you accept it or not.
So, yeah, that's a reasonable summary of the situation. I suspect this will be one of those episodes that we do where whatever we say, somebody will take the opposite point of view in the comments.
That's what controversy is all about.
We're going to try and do our best to be as impartial as possible and kind of give you our thoughts on what's happened here and why. Specifically, if we start right at the beginning of the story, though, New Zealand were over in Pakistan to play. I think it was only 2 or 3 T20s. The evening before, or I thought it was the morning of, to be honest, the first of those matches was to take place. The New Zealand Cricket Board were effectively advised by a security organisation known as Five Eyes, which is made up of some Western nations that monitor security threats, that there was a real and credible threat to, I think, specifically one of the players. Now, this has been contested by the Pakistani intelligence service, who said that threat was a hoax. Ultimately, we'll probably never know, because these kind of intelligence queries, intelligence questions, intelligence points, generally speaking, are not made public. So it's total speculation from our point of view, whether it was credible or not. What matters, though, is that the New Zealand Cricket Board were effectively told that they shouldn't play this game. I believe that their security consultant, the security consultant with the team, whose name is Reg, I've forgotten his surname. His name is Reg. He wasn't part of this decision, so it wasn't actually part of the team group at all. It was out of their hands, and on my understanding, they were sort of told go home, which they did immediately. Now the repercussions from that, obviously, well first of all, Twitter went ballistic, which is where we spend most of our time, and the overwhelming feeling there was sort of, or the overwhelming feeling that we picked up from Pakistan fans was of disappointment. I think disappointment mixed with a little bit of anger. And I think, if you look at Pakistan's long road back into international cricket, or not back into international cricket, but back into hosting international cricket, from a fan's point of view, there's probably it's quite understandable, I think, that you would be angry and you would be disappointed. However, mixed in with, probably all of that, and if we're talking very specifically about the New Zealand instance here, you do probably also have to consider the points of view of some of the players who would have been there on the ground, and I don't know, if we're being reasonable here, if your government effectively says that what you're going to do is dangerous and is a risk to your life, and they have intelligence that indicates that is the case, I don't know to what extent you can reasonably expect somebody to go and play a cricket match. So I don't think you can. From my point of view, I don't think I necessarily would direct any of that anger and disappointment towards the New Zealand players, and probably even the New Zealand Cricket Board, to be honest. I think this decision happened some level above their heads. So that, we had the disappointment and rage. The second thing, of course, was the knowing, I suppose, and as soon as New Zealand pulled out, the knowing that the ECB, who the cricket board represented by the UK, who are also a Five Eyes member, would have been privy to the same security information, and had now, depending on your point of view, been handed a get out of jail free card in terms of not having to go and do something they didn't want to do, or would take the same action based on the same intelligence to protect the safety of their players. Now, that's a very binary way of looking at things, isn't it, Max? The truth almost certainly lies somewhere in between there. But from the point of view of Pakistani cricket, you have to understand the disappointment, right?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, when you look at the New Zealand thing, you've got that point of they have been told there is a thing that could happen. There is a security threat, and I think it was a death threat against one player. So that's it's annoying that it happened. You've got every right to be angry. A number of different people, not least the people sending death threats, but it's understandable. Then, when you contrast that with what looks like has happened to England, as inevitable as it seems to be, there's a sense that they've been let down a bit. And I think, England, perhaps without, having a specific security threat to cite, doesn't give you the same kind of understanding that you would have for New Zealand as the reasons that they pulled out. And I think added to that is sort of the English statement about why they pulled out. It feels much vaguer and more wishy-washy than what we got from New Zealand. I mean, whether you agree with whatever knowledge you have or don't have about New Zealand's security people saying there's a threat, Pakistan saying there isn't a threat, we've got a great intelligence network, there's nothing that's going to happen. Fine, you can believe one of those or the other, but at the end of the day, if someone's told you something that is that serious, you have a right to act on it. Whereas with the England one, you've just got a sort of like, oh yeah, well, because of that, we're a bit concerned about security, which is understandable, but it was sort of like a very much seemed like a small part of what they were saying when they went on to say, and then the mental health of players being involved in further COVID bubbles, blah, blah, blah. It gives you the feeling that it's an excuse. And I can completely understand why anyone in Pakistan would take that statement and take from it that England have decided that they just don't really fancy it, especially in the spectre of a bunch of guys at the IPL having to pop over and travel more just ahead of the World Cup and going back to the UAE and that kind of thing. It feels like this was an inconvenience, and that there's been an opportunity to do away with that inconvenience.
Yeah, I don't. I think that's probably a reasonably accurate summary of the situation. Like there are a few things that are. This isn't a story that we have all the knowledge about, and we don't have,
no one really
we
does.
don't have spies in the dressing room even to tell us exactly what the conversation has been there. What we do definitely know is that this decision was made by the ECB. It wasn't a government decision. Whilst they may have been privy to some of the same information as the Kiwis. The government, the British government, did not say don't go to Pakistan. The British government, the Home Office or the Foreign Office rather, also haven't changed any of their guidance on travelling to Pakistan. So from a diplomatic point of view, nothing has shifted between this time last week and today that has meant that this tour definitely should not be taking place. I think your points about player welfare are probably being taken into consideration by the ECB. When players, and so there's the England women's team playing New Zealand at this point in time, and it has come up in their post-match interviews because obviously they were due to tour Pakistan for the first time.
Yes,
it's pretty big news. And Heather Knight, the England captain, has said that it wasn't a decision the players made. But I don't know. I mean, I think there's probably I think you could make a reasonable assumption that this conversation would have been had between the governing body and its players at some level anyway, and that probably the players didn't really fancy it.
And to be honest, I mean, as much as I say about the way that England put the statement out has left a lot of opportunity for people to be angry, and rightly so. I think you also have to consider that actually, if you're a player and recently another team have gone over and had a security threat, then you're likely to be nervous about going, and that adds to the sort of the mental, the mental health aspects of it. Like there's being in the COVID bubble, sure, but then there's, like you said, being expected to go out and play in the conditions when you might not feel safe. That's a stressful situation to be in, on top of all the other stress. And you also, I suppose, have to consider from the ECB's point of view, if New Zealand have gone over and been told there's a threat and gone back home, then 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, you send a team over and something awful happens. There's a certain amount of potential blame being laid at your door. So that's also, given the closeness of the two incidents, there could be.
Yeah, and I think the other consideration is probably the proximity of the T20 World Cup. I suspect now, and it's another scheduling issue. I suspect now that there are people who regret scheduling this pair of fixtures for a week or 2 weeks, whatever it is, before the T20 World Cup.
I suppose they didn't expect. This would have happened before the IPL being delayed, wouldn't it? Because it was a sort of a thank you for the test series. So
I think that transitions us on nicely, actually, that thank you for the test series, because it has opened up a whole load of other questions, particularly from England's point of view, less so for the Kiwis, because the nature of how they pulled out was different, but also they're a much smaller cricket board. But yeah, we do need to remember that Pakistan did come to England, did tour during when we were in full Plague Island mode, and played those 3 matches. Came back this summer for some white ball cricket. Played a reasonably big part in bailing out the English cricket from what could have been quite a serious financial black hole. And I think if you are Ramiz Raja or a Pakistani player, or you work for the Pakistani cricket board, or you're just a Pakistani fan, you can be rightly aggrieved at what feels like quite a nasty transactional decision that England have made there. In the, you were useful last year when you could give us some cash. Now what are you going to do for us? And I think that has left a bit of a bitter taste in the mouth. You couple that with things like Tom Harrison, the what is he, the CEO of the ECB, not even making the phone call to Ramiz Raja himself and actually palming that off on his chief of operations, so one of his underlings, saying that he was on holiday, and not really giving a full explanation
Dominic Raab.
Not really giving a full explanation about why this has happened, and not really presenting any kind of backup plan or future idea. That isn't great. What is, the silver lining from a comedy point of view to all of this, though, has been the Ramiz Raja,
Ranties Raja,
Ranties Raja stream on Twitter, and basically anyone that will listen to him, he's been telling them all about this. And I think, I'm not going to read loads of the quotes. They've been quite widely circulated. He's clearly quite an angry man who has a little bit of a reason to be angry. It is a bit ranty, going on about a Western Bloc, which may or may not be true. I mean, I'm sure there's a certain element of that, but it's interesting that he's decided to call it out. Max, have you enjoyed his micro meltdown?
I think it's been possibly the one positive from the entire situation, to be honest. Especially given the recent, upheaval in the Pakistani cricket board. Once again, he's a well-known, guy over in the UK with his work on TMS, I believe, is where he did a lot of the commentary. So, quite funny that he's gone into full meltdown mode. And he's got every right to be pissed off, just like anyone else involved in Pakistani cricket. But as the chairman, you may think that perhaps a slightly more diplomatic tone would be more appropriate for the situation. A strongly worded statement, absolutely. Maybe bits about going, right, we did before, we just wanted to beat India in the World Cup. Now we want to beat New Zealand and England. It doesn't matter about anyone else.
Yeah.
That was my favorite in the whole thing.
I'm quite looking forward to the revenge tour. An angry Pakistan coming for England and New Zealand, tearing up the T20 World Cup, and it might happen. That's what Ramiz Raja thinks will happen, or suggests could happen. We've already talked about how they've got an Australian in the dressing room now, and that's going to make a big impact.
That is the plan, isn't it?
Now they've got a purpose and an Australian, which is a lethal combination in sport.
And someone who was good against Australia.
There are possible further implications for Pakistan, and we'll see how it goes. They've got West Indies scheduled to tour. I think it might be later this year, it might be early next year. The head of West Indian cricket, Johnny Grave, I think is his name, has said that the West Indies do intend to visit Pakistan. So in terms of, in quotes, the rehabilitation of Pakistani home cricket, all is not necessarily lost, although this obviously will be a setback. I think people at first thought that this could be something that sets Pakistan back 5 or 10 years.
If it were like a 3-test series or something, then yeah, definitely. But I mean, we're talking a couple of T20s here. It's a slightly different,
quite poorly.
As
it turns out. There's a good reason for England to be there, and they should have gone there. I think. Or sent A team. And they could have sent Alex Hales 11, which would have been pretty funny. Or the best of the 100 or something like that, like they did at home. They were still good games. They still beat Pakistan at home doing that. And I'm sure there were players that would have gone, but they didn't. I'd be, I don't know if cautiously optimistic. Maybe not. Maybe optimistic isn't the. Maybe I wouldn't be optimistic. But I wouldn't necessarily be devastated at the prospects of big teams. I say big teams here. I mean like England and Australia.
You're bullish.
Yeah, they'll be back at some point soon.
Yeah.
The pandemic will probably have to subside a little
I
bit.
think it's probably on England to sort of take a stand for
Yeah.
that now and
Yeah.
lead the way.
Yeah, hopefully. I think we've covered that in some detail. We probably haven't done it yet, we haven't talked about it yet. We've talked about it now, but we hadn't on the podcast. At this point in time, nobody listening knows that we've recorded this. Is what I mean.
Yeah,
but now we've recorded it.
We're getting a bit meta here, a little bit Inception.
Yeah. It is a little bit Inception. Now we have talked about it, and it's good. You can find us on the Twitter and the Instagram at the Cricket Pod. We'll play some kind of a jingle if you're on the podcast, or you can go and find a different video of ours on YouTube. Subscribe, hit like, hit subscribe, leave us a comment, tell us where we're wrong. We love it. We love it when you do that. And
user engagement is what we're all about.
User engagement. If you're on the podcast, we're going to be talking about the IPL when we're back.